Chad Ford has been living 5 lives simultaneously for the last 20 years. He's been an international conflict mediator, a college professor, a senior consultant and facilitator for the Arbinger Institute, an executive board member for PeacePlayers, a writer, an analyst, and an entrepreneur covering NBA, the NBA draft, and for ESPN. While most people know him for his work at ESPN, being a basketball analyst and writer was actually his side gig for most of those 2 decades. Chad's peace-building work is what defines him, and his book, Dangerous Love, which we'll talk about in the episode, will show you why. Hello, and welcome to the Power Forward podcast, and I am your host, Chinny Nwagbo. Of course, the Power Forward podcast is presented by PeacePlayers International. Big hands up. Again, I'm your host. I'm excited to be here. First ever pilot show. Being able to just be in the room with all these great people and our special and amazing guest for today's episode, Chad Ford, who will be talking to us a bit about his book and so many more things under the sun. So I'm excited about this great conversation. But before I go forward, my favorite ever of all time. Yes, that's you, my co-host, Emmett. Please introduce yourself. Say a little something to the people.
Oh, thank you for that lovely intro, Chinny. For those who don't know, my name is Emmett Shepard. I'm the co-host, the sidekick, if you will, to Chinny. And I'm very excited to pick the brain of Chad Ford and just hear all his amazing insights. I listened to his book on Audible. I thought that hearing his soothing voice actually brought a new layer to all the teachings that he had to offer. But before we even start, I'm known on the streets as the Icebreaker King.
Yes.
I have a few that are pretty good. And Chad, one that I love to do, because it's sort of the theme of this podcast, is having uncomfortable conversations. For some reason, I believe that uncomfortable conversations lead to growth in the most amazing and deepening ways.
Definitely.
And for the icebreaker, what my question to you is to think of the last time that you had an uncomfortable conversation with somebody and what you got out of that uncomfortable conversation.
Good one.
That's a great one. Way to start with a bang.
We go 0 to 100 real quick.
He's the king. He's the king of these icebreakers, I tell you.
Well, it was with my 16-year-old daughter, and we tend to be having lots of those these days as she's navigating becoming an adult, and I'm trying to both still be a parent as well as give her space to become an adult. And the last uncomfortable conversation was around me crashing a party that she was at when she was late for curfew and embarrassing her in front of all of her friends.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, that will be a defining moment
that
for sure,
is,
in any person's childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so funny because, at the time that I was doing it, I talk a lot about this in the book. I felt really justified in what I was doing. It's multiple curfew violations, wasn't answering her phone, and that protective sort of thing that sort of comes out in you, as a dad, and thinking about that, but also not thinking about how she needs to feel seen and heard and respected.
Yeah.
Led to this real conflict, right? And I mean, we talk about this a lot in the book, but conflict is this sort of inability to collaboratively solve problems together.
Right.
And here we were, and so I went about it my way, which was the wrong way. By the way, for those of you listening at home that are thinking, "Oh, I would have done the same thing," but and so then ultimately we had to have a really hard conversation about how to do that right? How to show respect for each other, how to work together in the right way, and it's hard. Those are hard conversations to have, and it's hard to admit that you're wrong. And that was part of that conversation for me.
Yeah. I remember in the book the part you're referring to. It was, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was she was dating somebody and
Yeah,
was
she was
keeping that
15.
sort of under wraps.
Right. The rule was
Yeah,
16 years
same.
old. You couldn't date
Same.
until you were 16. Yeah.
Yeah, same child. So different story, same child.
Right.
But could be anything. She's an amazing person. But it's how we navigate relationships, and I think that one of the things that I found over the years is that navigating relationships means having those difficult conversations, and we're often scared to have them.
Right.
Because our fear is that something negative is going to come out of this, or a conflict that's already brewing we're going to make it worse in the process. And sometimes we do, by the way. Sometimes when we don't go about difficult conversations the right ways, that's exactly what's happened. So we have a track record with it. We see it sort of happening. And so I think it takes a lot of courage to engage people, to be vulnerable, to listen at times when you think you know what is right. To be accountable in relationships to when we've got it wrong, and be really open about that. And a lot of that's what Dangerous loves about, and a lot of that's the work that PeacePlayers does.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really amazing about that dynamic when you talk about father-daughter is oftentimes when we hear about relationships, we're not talking about our kids, right? We're talking about our coworkers. We're talking about the relationships we're in. We oftentimes don't break down every single relationship that we are potentially in. And we can't see how, and we'll talk about more as we move forward, how dangerous love is applicable to every single relationship, even the relationship you have with yourself, right? Because that's the most important relationship. And we talk about seeing people as people. But before we get there, and before we really dive deep into that, I want to ask you about just your overall journey. Obviously, you have a great story right now. We're hearing about your daughter, but your overall journey and how you pretty much arrived at PeacePlayers. I want to hear about that, a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could start way back, but I have always been interested in conflict, and I grew up in a community in Kansas City, Missouri, where there was a lot of racial conflict in our community growing up, and sort of grew up in that environment. When I went off to college, I didn't know what I really wanted to study. Ended up studying history and sociology and political science, but all of it again was sort of geared in college to try to understand whether it was large scale historical conflict or what have you. And I was in Hawaii for some of that as well, and became really moved and interested in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, which a lot of people don't really know about, but Indigenous Hawaiians seeking sovereignty over their island, over their life from the U.S. government. And that led me to go to law school at Georgetown, where I spent time thinking a lot about human rights, civil rights, international law, taking classes like that, then going to George Mason and studying conflict analysis and resolution, and really trying to pick up skills like mediation, facilitation, again, with a larger understanding of ethnic and religious conflict. And then this weird side journey that while I was in school trying to do all that, I was trying to pay my own way. I had a young family. I started a website. That website ended up being picked up by ESPN. And then for this weird 5 years, I was a NBA analyst, writer, television for ESPN, and loved that. I'm a huge basketball fan, just crazy about basketball. I always have been. And that last year that I was with them, thinking about the power of sport and how sport connected to my conflict work, and meeting some really interesting individuals like Dikembe Mutombo, who is really starting the first Basketball 100, and thinking about Africa and a number of the challenges that were there, and getting to travel on a trip with him to South Africa, to Vlade Divac and Tony Kukoc, who were friends growing up, but then split during the Balkans War, and then coming back together through Basketball Without Borders. And it just started to occur to me, maybe there's a way to combine these worlds in ways that I had always personally sort of kept them separate. And that's when I met Sean Toohey at an NBA All-Star game. Sean was one of the co-founders of PeacePlayers. And he began telling me about the work that they were doing in Northern Ireland, the work that they were doing in South Africa, and told me about a project that they were getting ready to start in the Middle East. And I was really interested. And then like two major life-changing things happened almost simultaneously. I decided that I wanted to work more on the conflict side than on the sports side. And so I left my full-time job at ESPN in 2005 to start a conflict resolution program out here in Hawaii. And I was going to do a little bit of freelance work on the draft for ESPN. And I was going to go out and visit PeacePlayers and actually write a feature-length article for ESPN called Hooping with the Enemy. And that experience on the ground with many of the same people that are still running PeacePlayers in the Middle East today, like it just transformed me. I was there for 2 weeks, just diving into the program, driving into the people. And afterwards I said, look, I'm going to write this story, but I really want to help and in any way that I can. And so, hopefully I can come back. And I've probably been back to the Middle East about 50 times.
Wow.
With PeacePlayers. And I didn't think it would be that many.
Okay.
Thought I'd do a workshop or something like that. But as I became really invested in the work that they were doing and made these connections and saw the impact that this was having, not just on the young people, that was really cool, but on the adults that were in the program as well, it became to me the clearest model that I've ever seen about how you make big types of transformations in these conflicts. And even though it's a slow process, the amount of sort of changes that you're seeing are really big. And so I started volunteering my time with PeacePlayers. I got more heavily involved. Eventually worked on the board, and then was in that group of people that began really thinking about how we take what we've learned internationally to the U.S. Following really, there's been many shooting incidents with police officers and African Americans in the U.S., but following Ferguson, which I think was a bit of a tipping point and a turning point, and starting to think about this thing and the rise of Black Lives Matter. Like, what would that look like in the United States? And so I love PeacePlayers. It's been a huge part of my life and my work. It was a big inspiration for Dangerous Love. There's an entire chapter that talks about some of that work in the Middle East, but a lot of the principles in Dangerous Love I learned by just working with and being with PeacePlayers.
Okay, so that is one of the many reasons why I think that you're amazing and terrific. But also I want to say it takes a certain type of person to be passionate about this type of work, right? To be able to take a mix of sports and conflict and want to be able to create a platform for sports and peace. So I think that is like, kudos to you. I love this. I love this kind of work.
Side question. When it was the first trip that you had gone out to PeacePlayers, was it the West Bank one? Did you go to the West Bank first? Was that the first 2 weeks that you were there? And was it like a friendship game style thing, or? No,
it wasn't. The program was only about 6 months old. So I was going to practices in like little villages in Jerusalem, like Beis Safafa. We went out to the West Bank. We were in Tulkarem. And we've really just seen the beginnings of this. It's really interesting. The woman that becomes the managing director and now the executive director at PeacePlayers, Karen Duboulay, was a grad student at the time. And Karen and I meet at a practice in Jericho as she's doing research on PeacePlayers. And we sit and sort of talk about like what the possibilities for PeacePlayers could be. I think neither of us knowing at the time how deeply influential PeacePlayers was going to be in our lives and going forward. And it was a really transformative experience for me, and gave me a model that I've used in a lot of other settings to think about how it is that we go about really transforming conflict, both with individuals and in the larger sphere of things.
Man, that's awesome. And so, Emmett, I don't want to cut you off, but
no, please. I
want to ask, because we're getting so deep into it, and we keep talking about Dangerous
excited.
Love, and so I want everyone who's listening to know a little bit about the book. So, Chad, can you just give us like a tidbit into what you mean or what we're talking about when we talk about Dangerous Love?
Yeah.
We're talking about sports and peace, and we're talking about PeacePlayers. Ideally, seeing people as people. Can you let us know what that is?
PeacePlayers is like one of the best examples of this, right? Because I wrote this book after a number of years as a conflict mediator and a professor and teaching people and thinking about like, what is it that actually transforms conflict from destructive to constructive? Like what are the sort of elements that actually make this stuff work? And the first thing that I realized is like the biggest obstacle. So you have to kind of overcome the biggest obstacles. And the biggest one is fear, right? We're afraid. We just talked about this from the beginning, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being hurt, general fear of conflict. And when I worked with clients, everybody from families to organizations to the larger scale international work that I've been doing, there's a real fear of not just people in conflict, but conflict in general.
Yeah.
And when I have that fear brain on, my ability to think creatively, my ability to listen, my ability to see other people is actually diminished, because there's these very ancient biological mechanisms that begin to happen within our brains, which is the fight or flight response to fear, right? So I try to avoid conflict if I can. If I can't, then I'm going to have to fight. And when our brain is in those modes, there's a ton of adrenaline pumping through our bodies. And I don't know another way to say it other than we just kind of become stupid. We get tunnel vision and we kind of become stupid.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we're impaired, like we're cognitively impaired.
Right.
And in those moments, we make bad choices about sort of how to make this go right. Yeah. And then when those things go badly, instead of saying, oh, I made a bad choice there, I blame the other person for it going badly. And I entrench even more in conflict. And so dangerous love is about how to think about approaching something that feels dangerous to us with love. And when I say love, I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm not talking about, that sort of love. I'm not talking about the love that means like I love pizza, or, I love a movies or whatever. Or I love my friends, because those sorts of loves are typically flee during conflict, right? Those are the sorts of things that we feel when things are all going right between people. And what happens when they're not going right? And so this is the sort of love that to me means that I see this other person so clearly that even though I'm in conflict with them, their needs, wants, and desires matter just as much as mine.
Right.
And I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and collaboratively work with them to solve that problem together. And I use the word love because I think it takes more than tolerance. I think it takes more than saying I'm not prejudiced or I don't discriminate.
Right.
I actually think it takes love. And one thing that I can say in all my experiences around the world with peace players, not just in the Middle East, is that these young Israeli and Palestinians, or these young Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, or what have you, they don't just like tolerate each other.
Right.
They're not just at the point where they're like, oh okay, all right, I'm not going to actively discriminate against you anymore. There is a deep connection and bond that they have with each other, that they want to work together to solve the problems. They don't always like each other, fair enough, but it's a deeper level of respect. And I think that's what Peace Players engenders. I think that's what the process is able to create. And it's something that's very intriguing to me then about how do you replicate that in lots of settings where people can overcome whatever fear there is. Because look, the first time I was in the Middle East, I was on a bus with a number of Palestinians that were getting bused to a gym in Israel to play basketball for the first time in twinning. And the young kids in the back, they were crying in the bus. They were afraid that when they got out, because of all their views they had of Israelis, that they were going to get shot, they were going to get arrested, they were going to get put in prison or what have you. And the fear was palpable, like what is going to happen to me? And so it's mind blowing to think, okay, we finally get them in there. They start playing basketball together. At first, the Israelis are only passing the Israelis, and the Palestinians are only passing the Palestinians, and they're blaming each other when they miss a shot or whatever. But eventually, that competitive instinct starts to kick in, and they figure out they got to work together. And the first time you have a kid who an Israeli throws a pass to a Palestinian, he makes a layup, and then you see the hands go up and the high five as they go back down the court. Like all the fear is gone. Right. They're working together now. They're adding each other on Instagram. And something really, really cool is happening there. Yeah. And it's an amazing model of like what needs to really happen everywhere.
And I have just one follow-up question that I'm just curious about. So in the book, you talk about sort of the missile scare in Hawaii that happens to you, and sort of that being a moment where it's sort of this like the mindset for dangerous love sort of develops in a pretty deep way for you in that moment. Were there other moments besides that one later on that sort of kept that engine going or made it go a little deeper, or just in a sense of like made you more aware of that? If that makes sense.
I think it's been my whole life.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, when conflict comes my way, I wish it would go away. Right? The missile scare was an awesome one for those that haven't read the book or don't know the story. In Hawaii, several years ago, we got a text, an emergency text on every phone in Hawaii that said a ballistic missile was heading towards Hawaii and to take cover. And like you had like 15 minutes or something like that. And at the time, there was a lot of stuff going on with North Korea. And I think everybody thought North Korea had launched a nuclear warhead at Hawaii. And, the reactions are everything from panic, fear, people grabbing each other, trying to find a shelter. We don't really have a lot of nuclear fallout shelters in Hawaii. I'm not really sure where you would go, to be honest. And part of it was that sort of moment for me, having done this for so often, understanding, look, this is something I can't change. It's coming. I wish it would go away. I wish it didn't have to do it. And I can't fight it. I can't like go out and build a shield around my home or, whatever. And so this is a moment where I just have to be open and alive to this is happening. What I'm going to do, I actually, it was early in the morning. I didn't wake up my kids. I kind of went in and gave them both a little kiss on the forehead. And then I went out and laid out in the grass. And, in that moment, what I thought was going to be fear, the reaction really was all the memories that came back to me about my life and the relationships and people. It all came back to people. And this love that I just kept growing inside of me. And I felt at the end of it, my takeaway from it was like, at the end of the day, this is what matters. It doesn't matter what car you drive or what your house is like, or what your title is at work or whatever. What you carry with you in life, what brings happiness or brings sadness or pain, is our relationships with each other. And, certainly everybody nods their head about, your family or whatever. But, to me, it was much more extensive than that because of all the work I'd done with PeacePlayers or whatever, my relationship with people all over the world, that we're interconnected together in ways that if we spent more time and energy just working on these conversations and rolling up our sleeves and saying, look, we're in this together. And therefore we have to collaborate together to find the solution that works for everybody. We could solve virtually every problem that exists in our world today. If we would just have those conversations, if we would just approach it with love and respect, if we would just approach other people with the idea that their needs, wants, and needs matter just as much as mine. And so we can't be afraid. Yeah, we can't be afraid.
That's a great retort that you just gave to the question that Emmett asked. But I have a question that changes the lens of that. So it all goes back to relationships for you. But let's say, and you can't speak to this because it's different. Like, what if all your relationships that you've known have been bad relationships? But let's say you don't have the resources that you have to really understand and grasp what a solid and amazing relationship should look like. Let's say, you're some of the youth that we work with who've never even known what a great relationship looks like. And so does that same epiphany happen to them in that same type of situation? And we'll never know that, but I think it's important to really think about how we're even able to land on that perception of dangerous love, how we're able even to see things in that type of lens, and how that depends on who we are, how we've grown up, and what resources and accessibility have been a part of our lives. So
absolutely. Right. Yeah. No, you're 100% right, because we have to leverage something. We have to leverage like what that could look like. And so in my case, I'm being raised by a single mom that was an amazing mom.
Right.
She really was an amazing mom for me. Like if you go back and say who taught me about love and what this sort of looks like and selflessness and everything else, I can go back to my mother.
Right. Right.
But I know not everybody can go back to their
Mm-hmm.
mom or their dad or their community or their church or their And so one of the interesting things is teams and team sports, often for some people, this is the first time they find something like this. Right. And so sports can become that outlet.
Their coach.
And I really want to believe that one of the reasons that PeacePlayers needs to exist is not just for the conflict resolution or teaching, the basketball skills. It's actually creating a culture that for some of our young people, they're stepping into the first time where they're seen as people. We talk about this value in PeacePlayers, see people as people is our value. And recognizing that one of the spaces that we're creating in these communities is maybe for the first time in their life, they're stepping into a space where they're actually seen.
Right.
And that becomes the transformative thing for them, because so much in their interpersonal life and then structurally, because we just got to talk about that too, because we have a relationship with the structure as well. I'm not seen. I'm seen as an object. I'm seen as inhuman. And that digs deep. It scars deeply within our souls. And it's very, very difficult then to be open to my own humanity, let alone anybody else's.
Absolutely.
My own in those moments. And so, the almost sacred responsibility in many ways that our Peace Player coaches have and our alumni have about creating those spaces where they don't exist for a lot of young people today.
Exactly.
That is the work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So just wanted to put that out there, because sometimes stories change, lens change, like who you are, where you are, what you've experienced. It impacts you greatly, like that inside outside transformation that we talk about. But these are key things, and it's important to point those things out when we are talking about that dangerous love. Are we ready for this lightning round?
We are.
Okay. I knew this was going to go deeper and be better, but I just wanted to break the ice a little bit here.
We got to break it a little bit. And I'm very curious to see how quickly, Chad, you can answer all of these questions.
You have to answer these questions, Chad, in less than 3 seconds.
No choice. Okay.
Yes.
3 seconds.
Yes. No choice. Less than 3 seconds. Emmett, are you ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
All right.
Okay. So first one, what was the last thing that made you smile?
Moab. I just went hiking in Arches and Canyonlands National Park, and the beauty of that place was, oh man, I had a smile on my face for like 2 days.
Oh, I've never been. I want to go so badly. Favorite time of day?
Morning, 5 a.m.
Morning. Okay. Favorite meal of the day?
Lunch.
Okay. Sweet or salty food?
Salty.
Okay. Scuba diving or skydiving?
Skydiving.
Favorite sport?
Basketball.
Favorite place in the world to travel?
Jerusalem.
Name a person who inspires you.
And there's so many choices there, but I'm going to pick my good friend from the Middle East, Summer Aliyan.
Shouts out Summer. Last thing you laughed at.
Last thing I laughed at. Oh, now you've got me. Now you got me stuck. I laugh a lot, so I just like trying to think about like what specifically. Oh, driving in a Jeep down a 1-lane road and everybody in the car freaking out in Moab because it looked like we were going to fall off, and it started with screaming and ended just with laughter, like belly laughter, because it's like we're afraid. It's exactly like dangerous. We're afraid of this thing. We're not going to die, but just the even thought of dying, it made me laugh.
Last book you read?
Last book that I read. It's called Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Oh, wow. Last movie you watched?
Last movie that I watched was Nomadland.
Did you like it?
Award. I did.
Yeah, I thought it was beautiful. Name one thing you want to leave the world with after you're gone.
better relationships.
Nice. I like it.
Save or spend it?
Both. Save
Take
some,
out or dine in?
but spend some.
Of course.
Hey, right,
Of course.
right now, take out. Right now, take
out.
out.
Country or city life?
Country life. I live out in the mountains here in Hawaii. Love the country life.
And then
That's my
finally,
favorite.
one takeaway you want the listener to remember from today, if they could have just one thing.
Yeah.
Love is stronger than fear.
It absolutely is. And with that being said, that's the drop the mic moment. So just circling back, so we have a little something for our younger listeners to listen to. We talked about how seeing people as people definitely strongly aligns with dangerous love, and we're just talking about seeing the humanity in others and approaching people with that kindness. And so one of my questions is, how can we right now, in the midst of this crazy pandemic, for our young kids who are at home, who don't really have access to many things, how can we continue to practice dangerous love at home in the midst of this pandemic? When we want to be with our friends, we want to be on those teams, we want to do those different things in person. What are some things that our young peace players all around the world can be doing to practice dangerous love in their everyday lives?
I think in the pandemic, where it seems in some ways like it's going to be harder because we're separated, but then
Right.
we're also confined with a lot of people that maybe our relationships were better when we weren't around them so much.
Yeah.
Just, kind of being honest, like it kind of worked because we only saw each other for like 15, 20 minutes a day.
Mhm.
Right,
But now that we
right.
see each other for 6, 7 hours, it doesn't
Like,
work so much.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in the pandemic is, what are the things that keep me disconnected? What are the distractions that keep me from being mindful in life? And, a lot of things slowed down for a lot of people during the pandemic. And how do I, as we start to move back into, I don't know that it'll ever be the same, but more normally like it was the same. How do I make sure that those distractions don't interfere, with my relationships going forward as we get busier, as we get more things and opportunities and distractions on our plate than we've had before? I'm thinking about what really matters. And so for me, some of these quiet moments left, because they're starting to go away for me. I don't know about you, but things are starting to speed back up and getting, back into sort of normalcy, like remembering what are those core things that I really, really understand that are important to me, and how do I hold on to them in the face of a constant barrage of other things that are going to start coming my way, which I think is going to be true for young people, whatever. So it's literally like an exercise, like a mindfulness exercise, is to sit down and say, what actually brings me happiness?
Right.
What brought me happiness during this moment? And how do I hold on to and prioritize and value those things and let go of the things that I may have spent a ton of time doing that didn't really bring me anything?
Right. And I think that you kind of tiptoed into this, but yes, dangerous love, I feel like, embodies everything in terms of like mental health and wellness, right? Really taking that time to like sit with yourself and think about the things that are important to you, and why you're doing what you're doing and why you're here. I know as a kid that might be a little hard.
And scary.
And we don't, you talked about not using fear as the platform, but
is there any, I'm just curious, is there any sort of circumstance or situation where practicing dangerous love you don't think applies?
Yeah.
I do, actually.
Good question, Emmett.
Whenever dangerous love is literal, and so the dangerous part is literal, that's not what I'm meaning. In other words, if you're in an abusive relationship or in your abusive home, what I'm not arguing is, hey, you just turn and take the abuse anyway. You love the abuser. And part of loving the abusers, keep taking it. Now maybe the love part is I still need to see the humanity of people that hurt me. Fair enough. But do I need to take that abuse or that hurt? Am I arguing that, the right thing to do is to stay in that relationship? I'm not at all. And occasionally, unfortunately, really too often, when people are in relationships that are truly dangerous because of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse that's happening in the room, they will read the book and say, okay, what he's saying here is I got to stick it out.
Mm.
You know, like
Yeah.
I got to stick this out. And actually, I'm saying don't stick it out.
Right.
Love yourself enough to walk away, but your healing is going to come actually through seeing the humanity of the people that hurt you. It doesn't mean that I will be back in a relationship and allow them to hurt me again, that I'm going to get out of that relationship if I can in any other way. But interestingly enough, we've seen over and over again that even the people that hurt us are people. Even the people that have mistreated us in some ways are people. And there's a way to see their humanity while stopping the dangerous behavior and stopping it from ever happening again. So yeah, if you were to hear all this and say, okay, it just means that I should take it. Right. No, you leave, you protest, you raise your voice, right. You shed light on the abuse or the injustice right. that's happening, while at the same time, and this is why John Lewis and Martin Luther King and so many people are inspiring to me, because they have this uncanny ability to both at one point put a spotlight on the injustice.
Absolutely.
And light it up for the world so that they could see it very, very clearly, including their nonviolent resistance, which actually often escalated the abuse.
Right.
So people could see it while still loving their enemy.
Right.
And I feel like we swing too much one way or the other. We either say, okay, I love my enemy, and so I'm going to not talk about this, or I'm just going to avoid this. I'm not going to have a difficult conversation, or I'm not going to raise my voice because that would be impolite, or not nice, or whatever. And I think that's wrong. Or I shine a spotlight on it, but as I shine it, my anger and hatred towards the people that are putting the system grows so right. strongly that I can't actually collaborate or work with them anymore. And actually what I do is I create a bigger divide instead
right.
of bridging the divide. And so, finding that space, and I understand both those other reactions because I've been there in my own life as well. The ability, that would be cool to say this or raise this, or, what will people think? Or, what's this going to cause for me? Or on the other end, just being so angry and so disgusted at people's behavior that I want to see them punished, right. that I want to see them hurt, that I want them to see them humiliated, and recognize that neither of those are the paths to peace. But John Lewis and that great documentary, Good Trouble, is just sort of this great example of like creating trouble, right? Raising that spotlight, showing it, but for the right reasons, right? For about inviting ultimately that transformation and change.
Yeah. No, that's speaking of spotlight and just what you've said. I kind of want to talk about just what's been happening over the past couple of years with just athletes, right? And them using their platforms to speak out against racial injustice. And kind of what does that look like for our peace players, and how they can use their platforms to shine a spotlight on exactly what you're saying. But I think that that this is like a special place that we can definitely talk about in terms of just athletes using their platforms and what that looks like for racial injustice, and just how we can continue to build on that.
To me, they're some of my biggest heroes.
Yeah.
And it's not because of their great athletic abilities. It's that these young women and men have led the charge at sometimes significant risk because of Colin Kaepernick or others, to maybe their marketability or whatever, that they have raised their voice. And many of these young women and men, they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and they've eloquently brought a spotlight and used their positions of influence to raise awareness about these issues, to speak unflinchingly about what's going on, to speak consistently, not just once, but over and over again about this, to make demands about things changing before they'll use their talents. But almost uniformly, I don't hear hatred. I don't hear divisiveness. I hear a calling people in to a better and humane world. Sport can do that.
Yeah.
Right. Sport can bring us together despite a lot of our differences, and them using that experience to call all of us in this country, especially together. It's been some of the most inspiring stuff that I've seen done. I think they've been experts, masterful,
right.
at how they've used their voice and their platform in a way. And that's real courage to me, because there's something at risk there for those young people. There's something that they've seen a pattern in the past of what can happen to me if I do this, and they've done it anyway because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Like you said, there's a high level of risk there. And it is very courageous. It is very courageous to have to do something that you don't have to do, to speak out against things that you know are unjust. It is very, very courageous. And I'm happy about the movement, being a woman of color and also an athlete, a former professional athlete. I think this is a very amazing and great space for us to be in, because it wasn't like this before. You could see it, remnants of people speaking out and pointing the spotlight at racial injustice in Olympics and different areas, but not like how we've had it in the past 2 years in relation to the George Floyd death and Black Lives Matter and things of that nature. So,
and one of the things that's so inspiring to me is if our young people can do it,
exactly,
as an old man, what's my excuse?
Exactly.
Right? Like, what's my excuse? And this is something I love about PeacePlayers. Young people are leading the way.
Yeah.
Young people, and I've seen this happen over and over again. They shouldn't have to. It's not right. They shouldn't be the ones that should have to lead on this. It's absolutely unfair. It's absolutely unfair that people of color are the people that are having to lead this out. It's absolutely unfair that it's young people. It's absolutely unfair that it's often the socioeconomically disadvantaged that are leading out. But if they can do it despite all of the challenges that they face to it, what's everybody else's excuse for not getting on board? And I've seen this. It's a transformative part of PeacePlayers as their parents begin to turn, as community members get to turn, as teachers or whatever become inspired by these young people. And sometimes I've had people joke with me, oh, really, basketball is going to change the Middle East, or basketball is going to save this. And I'm like, it's not the basketball. That's not it. It's the space that it creates. It's the leaders that it creates. It's the connection that it creates that I hope is raising a new generation that is not going to stand for this anymore, and is actually going to be committed enough to making the changes that we need to make in our world and in our communities and our society, to make sure that the injustices of the past are never the injustices of the future.
Absolutely. And so here's something, and you've touched on it, and I want to know more. I always want to know more, right? I'm always learning. And I'm saying, I would like to know how people of color can lean more into dangerous love without that fear, because leaning in to dangerous love is a very fearful place, especially turning first. And you talked a bit about it before, but the truth is, for example, the example of George Floyd, he turned first, and being able to feel safe enough within environments to want to be able to turn first, to really truly be seen as a human, and always been in position to see people as people, in a world that doesn't necessarily see people of color as people. I mean, we were 3/5 of a person at one point. So how can we continue to move in dangerous love and feel comfortable to turn first and lean into that concept?
Yeah. I would say at first, one of the things that I would say, especially in the context of our country, that these are African-American ideas.
Right.
That the stuff that you're thinking about, like my book, Dangerous Love, was inspired by a book by Martin Luther King called Strength to Love.
Oh, awesome.
The single most inspiring book that I ever read. And when I was in, tell a quick little story here, but when I was in law school and I was trying to figure out, man, what do I want to do? And I wasn't sure law was the way. I just wasn't sure. I mean, no offense to any lawyers that are out there, but I wasn't sure that because the law can change the laws, and those are really important, but they don't change people's hearts. And you need both. We need hearts to change and laws to change. Right. But when laws only in and of themselves only change, hearts don't change. And so Absolutely. I became really interested about how do you get both hearts and minds to change. And I met this man, Dennis Ross, who was the chief negotiator for Middle East peace in the US and was asking some questions. And he told me to go visit this man, Wallace Warfield, who would work with Dr. King and was at George Mason's Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution and running a master's program there. And so this is pre-cell phone days. This is going to age me a little bit. So I got on the train from DC and I went down to Mason and like knocked on his door and nobody was there. So I sat there for several hours waiting for him to come. And when he comes in, I'm trying to catch him, but he's in a hurry. And he's like, hey, who's this guy? And what why am I talking to him? And so I just finally told him, look, I think I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. Can you give me 5 minutes? And so he sets me down. And he says, okay, what do you want to know? And I tell him that this is what I want to know. And he says, okay, well, what do you know about Dr. King? And I said, okay, I got this. I've studied Dr. King a lot. I know this thing. He's like, you idiot. That's not what I'm talking about at all. Like, what about the methods that he used, the philosophy behind the movement, right? That this sort of nonviolent response. And the answer was, I was pretty ignorant.
Right.
I didn't understand the philosophy or the techniques behind it. And he pulled the Strength of Love off his shelf, slid it over across his desk and said, read this. And if you still want to talk to me afterwards, you can come back. And what he didn't expect was I was going to go outside the building, sit under a tree, read the book cover to cover that day, and knock on his door late afternoon and say I'm in. And so one of the things that I sort of recognized, and I was learning as a white male, a privileged white male, was that privilege and power blind you,
right,
to what actually changes and turns hearts, right? And so when you have privilege and power, you believe that I can leverage that privilege and power as a force to make things change, but people resist power and privilege when they don't have it. It's demeaning, it's condescending, it's blind to the lived realities of people around me. And so it took someone who lacked that privilege to show me as a white person that my way of going about it was the exact sort of wrong way, that actually it's giving up power and privilege and becoming vulnerable and using the power of love over fear.
Right.
That's what changes people. And I believe the only people that could have really discovered that were people that didn't had that power and that privilege at the time, because it's so easy. It's lazy, right? To sort of rely on that. And so, one of the things that I would just say that I learned is that, and I saw King do this, is that power, King called it a force more powerful. He called it the weapon of love at times. That and Gandhi does the same thing in India, and and Howard Thurman had been writing about this forever within the sort of realms of sort of Christian thought and what have you, is that what the world tells you about what your power is just false. What the world tells you about what is really valuable, not it's a lie. It's a smoke screen,
right?
To what really is power, what is really soul force,
right?
And that no one can take that away from you. And that was King's message, that everyone had that inside of them. As you learn how to cultivate that and use it, it is what turns hatred. It extinguishes hatred. It turns hatred into love. And so, I think my only advice that I could give, and I don't know that I'm even equipped to give advice as a white male of privilege, is just what I've seen and I've learned from others about that power of turning first, and the way that, and interestingly, in certain ways, it actually makes us safer, because we're not resorting to the dehumanizing methods that created the problem in the first place, but we're replacing those methods with the humanizing methods that ultimately turn hearts.
Yeah. I was thinking while you were saying what you were saying, and just trying to see it from my lens. And I think that, that's it, right? I think part of it too is just being able to understand the environment, and then also being able to be wise enough on when that turn happens. Because I think from my perspective, I've always had to see the humanity in others because I have to, right? But turning first looks more like being aware of that environment. I'm already seeing the humanity in others and being very intentional about when I turn and who I'm turning with, if that makes any sense, for my own safety. I can say that very, very surely. I can say that what I love most about PeacePlayers is that I see people as people. When I heard these core values, seeing people as people, inside outside transformation, culture of collaboration, I was like, oh my God, that's me. That's my life. Is that what it's called? And I was like, oh, this is what I've been. Okay. So I know that is who I am. I've always been this way, just like you've said. I've always been this way. But I also know that turning first as a woman of color is a skill to have. And it's very important to understand your environments. And of course, while I'm walking and seeing the humanity in others, it's also understanding that there are people in the world who are just truly evil, no matter what you do. And you can't change them, but the best thing you could do is see the humanity in them. And for me, that's turning first. That's it. That's my turn first there.
And one other thing I'd say, Chinny, that you alluded to, which is that I have to see it in myself.
Yep.
Right. Because if I'm coming from a position of living in a structurally abusive community and environment, you're learning how to defer and turn first to others, but you don't turn first toward yourself.
Exactly.
Right. And you're talking about, when do I not put myself in positions of danger? And if I don't see the humanity in myself, I may put myself in that position way more than I should, because I don't see my own humanity, right? And so it's actually understanding where self-care is involved, where it's appropriate to see that. And I especially, my experience working with young people is like, one of the biggest things that we have to help them see is their own humanity, because they live in a crushing system that doesn't see it and acknowledge it, and it sinks in. And what I want to say to people of power and privilege, which I feel as a white male, maybe I should be speaking more to them, frankly, the people of power of privilege, is to let go of that and not be afraid to let go of that. Vulnerability is a strength. Listening is a strength. Hearing other people's life experiences and perspectives of things is not weakness. It's a strength. It will cultivate something within you that power and privilege block you from really, really feeling. And despite all the fears that if I give this up, again, I'm sort of talking to people of power and privilege right now, and instead of the fears of giving this up right now, what's going to happen to me if I give this up? You have to let go of that and say, what could happen to us if I would? How could I invite healing? How could I invite real collaboration? How could I invite real justice? By just letting go of those things and opening myself up and listening, admitting that I have these things, doing my best to let them go in every situation, doing my best to lead first. And really, in a just world, it's the people of power and privilege that turn first.
Well, I think.
I hope that white people can do that at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like, I hope that fear of that privilege going away is trumped by the love of wanting to listen, you know?
Yeah. Well, look, I'd say they can, Emmett. Like, I don't say I hope they can. They can. The question is, will they?
Right.
Right. And will they becomes the question. And to do that, to overcome that, it does require that shift, that change, that ability to say that those people's needs, wants, and desires matter just as much as mine. That I'm on this planet, in this community, in this family, whatever it is, with them, in this organization with them, and their success is my success, and we rise together, we fall together, and any of this privilege or whatever that's keeping me separated from them has to go.
It's kind of like a redefinition.
One could say it starts with an uncomfortable conversation.
Yes. Well, this will be really uncomfortable to listen to for some people. And I recognize that. And I was just at a workshop last week and somebody told me, my wife and I were reading your book, and my wife took it out on the porch and shredded your book.
Wow.
Like literally tore the pages out and shredded it. She was so upset. And, he's like, I'm really sorry. And I'm like, oh, that's a good sign.
Right.
When I heard that, because it's poking something. It's making her uncomfortable in the best sort of ways. And if your reaction is to tear up the book, there's way worse things you could have done than tear up the book. You can always get another book. Right. Right. But it means it's affecting us in the right way. And all of us need to get a little bit more uncomfortable at times, because that is the way, actually, interestingly, to the right sort of comfortableness that comes from actually truly connecting to other human beings. But the way to get there is uncomfortableness, not comfortableness.
Right.
I couldn't agree more.
A sense of kind of unlearning everything you've learned before. No, this is awesome. I think.
There's been like 8 drop the mic moments.
I know, right? You don't even know. I don't even know how to drop the mic at the end. But this has been very amazing, Chad. Thank you so much for the spectacular conversation and just being here and sharing some of all the greatness that you've learned as you've traveled and you've seen people as people, and you've had that inside-outside transformation, and then collaborating here with us to build this culture. You like how I dropped those core values in there. Thank you. Really appreciate it. We appreciate the conversation. I'm sure there should be a part 2, 3, 4, and 5 if you're open for that at some point down the line, but we appreciate you. Emmett?
Chad, I have a quick thing. Where can people find you, follow you? What are the plugs that you would like to put?
Well, I have a website at dangerouslovebook.com where you can find out more about the book. There's a Dangerous Love podcast there, what have you. You can follow me on Twitter at Chad Michael Ford, or on Instagram as well. And there's stuff there as well. I just want to say thank you for the conversation too. And thank you, Chinny and Emmett, for being really present. I learned things. Chinny, especially you, hearing your reaction to some of those things and talking about your life experiences was a teaching moment for me as well, to even think deeper about these ideas and continue to think about how my words and the things that I write land in different places with different life experiences. That was actually a really great teaching moment for me as well. And so I feel like I walk away from this podcast having learned a little bit more and listened a little bit more carefully. And so just thank you for both of you raising your voices back and giving your perspectives on it, because I think this is the way, right? This is the way that we grow and learn together. And so it was really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you guys for listening, joining us on our journey. If you'd like to hear more, we encourage you to tune into our next episode and subscribe. I'm not sure where we'll be in terms of like Apple and all these other things, but this is a pilot show. So we'll be everywhere. So look for us on Instagram, Twitter, and please share with your friends. And Emmett, you have anything that you want to add?
No, just listen. Just always listen. At the end of the day. Ubuntu, that's my final word. I'm so glad that you brought that up in the book, Chad, because it's something I very much believe in.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. See you next week.
See you next week.
If you like what you heard, we encourage you to like and subscribe. We've got many more conversations and stories like these to share in the coming weeks. You can learn more about PeacePlayers by visiting our website and following us on social media, mostly at PeacePlayers International on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.